That rhythm.
So I'm joined today by MFA graduate Devin Ratheal.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Teacher of Drawing 1 and Drawing 3. Congratulations on graduating. I saw your thesis show. It was very cool.
Thank you.
And we're going to continue kind of talking about painting, your work, and religious and occult iconography. So one of my first questions is like, how has religious iconography played into your work?
Well, it's very prominent in my thesis show, the most recent body of work. I was dealing with, paintings from the Renaissance and some Baroque, some paintings from the Baroque period. And, pretty prominent, especially in Renaissance painting, is religious imagery, Christian imagery.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was sort of surprising. It seemed to work its way into my work through the back door, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I had a sort of long interest in images and how sort of we navigate our world in terms of images.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of in a phenomenological sense, like if you recognize someone, what is like the experience of that? There's a kind of an imagistic quality that somehow you sort of are able to meet your map of an image of a person with your sensual experience, which is always like flowing and changing, but somehow we stabilize that for our whole world. And how that sort of that function of our perception, our conceptual navigation of life, the way that has been dealt with, or sort of what our imagistic history is when it's explicitly about like spirituality or our deepest sense of ourselves, our place in the universe. Images have played a crucial role in that. And so it's the long rambling answer. But I've come across people who had a similar interest, and you can pick up some of those threads in like the early days of art history as we come to understand it, and aesthetic philosophy too. So that's a combination of my own abiding interest in this weird space between, so to speak, between knowing and experiencing, sort of have sensual experience, and this sort of becoming aware of like, how have we sort of mapped this world for ourselves historically in terms of the way that images are experienced, the way that they're handed down, the way they're interpreted, all of that sort of thing. So we have that sort of individual and collective meeting there. And for me, as a descendant of, Western European people, that's sort of my imagistic history, although I don't know where I come from, so to speak. It's like all lost in the past. And also I wasn't raised in a Christian home explicitly, but I'm surrounded by that in West Texas. So it's like, also from that perspective, it's like trying to figure out what those things mean to me, because I'm a part of that history and separate from it at the same time. So I think I'm just sort of I was making paintings, and that was, I think, part of what I was trying to figure out or touch is that sort of personal and collective relationship of imagery and sense of self or something.
Yeah. So as someone who's seen your work, your thesis show specifically, the religious iconography that we referred to isn't exactly like straightforward, it's kind of distorted. So do you use this iconography to convey meaning or like feeling?
Like meaning and feeling, I think, are pretty closely associated in one way. And so, but in the feeling as a way of talking about sensing and like sensual experience, there is that for me, certainly that tension. And so, take images of these paintings and distort them in Photoshop so that things are recognizable. You just use like a wave distortion. So there's a lot of undulation and things get stretched and repeated and folded into things, and you get new forms, but you also have recognizable elements. And so for me, it seemed productive to sort of amplify that so that you are confronted with the sort of feeling that's associated with recognition of something that's, you know, explicitly recognizable, and the feeling of being caught in sensation, or sort of perpetually having to explore the image. So feeling through it in that sense, so that you have both of those kinds of feeling, both the comfort of recognition and the instability, but hope perhaps also sort of the excitement of like never being quite grounded in whatever that recognition is.
Do we ever see occultism in your work?
I think so. I think I just wanted to recommend a couple books as we go, maybe for people if they're interested. I don't know if does it flip? Is my screen flip?
Yeah, Astrology and Magic and Alchemy and Arts.
This is like a visual dictionary of all of these, just, you know, work that I'm interested in, the Western canon, and it breaks it down, and it's very brief, but if you look at almost any work from any of these periods, you can begin to get a sense of, you know, there will be something where you're like, oh, I understand what this is, but then something might be prominently featured, like a bull or something like that, up close to the baby Jesus, or something like that, and you're like, what is this about? Like this very super prominent bull, and starting to unpack those moments of like, there's the familiar and the unfamiliar, and that sort of provokes this question of like, why? And there's an answer typically, and it has to do with these traditions of largely like the intermingling of astrology, magic, and alchemy, and Christian iconography, and the meeting of those things, and how those things have taken centuries to work through each other, such that you would get really explicit, you know, images from some old astrological iconography, and it's been transformed or is still present with something which it seems to be really out of step with. And just to go ahead and throw this in there, like Abby Vorberg is like a early art historian who was interested in these things and was like tracing the history of images, and it's really a fascinating history. I don't know if I answered that well.
No, it's super cool.
Yeah, I just mean to say I think it's everywhere. Even though even in our images today, we're probably still have echoes of really, really old images.
Why/how does religion and occultism amass huge followings? And how do you think art has like facilitated that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think what's so fascinating to me about all of this is that I think that, you know, this, it's really drawing on Abby Vorberg's work, but it's, I think we unconsciously or subconsciously are, again, representing our world to ourselves. And so there's this really subtle way in which we're like creating images of the world, even though it's always moving in our sensory experience, we're sort of keeping it stable. So that's a way in which you can think of it as being like image production unconsciously, sort of subconsciously and perpetually. And I think we do that. So we do that unconsciously and subconsciously, but I also think that it's been a tradition of doing it intentionally and consciously. And perhaps those things were sort of more intermingled early on, but like ritualistic sort of interaction with the world. I think what constitutes art is like this long offshoot, this long history of a ritual navigation or interaction with the unknown world. And so again, drawing on Abby Vorberg, like this idea of ritual as a means of forming a relationship to these inhuman forces out in the world, trying to represent them, and in doing so, either in constructing an image or performing a ritual, you try to create this sense of connection so that you bring it into your control at least a little bit. You're not just subject to the whims of fate or the chaos of the world. So if you have you're wearing an amulet, or you have something in your home, or you do some sort of movement, that's sort of like, to me, early dance, right? Or early image production. And so I think that, trying to get back to your question, like art today is fulfilling a similar function, but it's probably more easily recognizable in the realm of advertising or mass media or these kinds of things, where we're being presented narratives about the world with a heavy reliance on imagery. It's not a very romantic answer, I don't think, but it's yeah.
Okay. You did say within your answer towards the beginning, I'm pretty sure, facilitating like a connection for us to something like inhuman, something like not something like above us. And that got me thinking about, I took a Gothic architecture class with Dr. Elliott a couple years ago, and she was talking about the use of gargoyles on cathedrals and how they're like kind of scary figures were meant to not necessarily scare people, but kind of like bait them into thinking, if you don't go to church, this thing's gonna like swoop down, or it's going to meet you when you go to hell, essentially. And they continued that sort of idea in like illustrated manuscripts. They had these things called grotesques, where they were just like tiny little like goblin creature things that were like, if you don't read the Bible, if you don't go to church, you're gonna get eaten one day.
Yeah, I think fear is like at the core of survival, right? It's about being aware of what's going on, and we're just hyper aware, and that can certainly be exploited, imagistically, especially when literacy is not a common thing.
Yes.
But I think we can sort of undermine that argument a little bit, given what the world looks like today. There's plenty of information, but fear still seems to be running the show for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, can I say something else about that?
Of course, please go ahead.
So just thinking about like my interest in images, and what I was looking for in my work is like, images are so incredibly powerful, right? Mm-hmm. I think they hit us. They strike us deeply. Like another good reference would be like Joseph Campbell's A Hero with 1,000 Faces, right? This idea that we have archetypes sort of in our unconscious. And I think generally we're just so affected, so much more receptive to our environments than we're aware. And images, so they strike us deeply, they pull on us, and whether they're sort of offering us relief, or they're scaring us into action or promoting fear into action, I think they're both sort of serving the same purpose relative to another option, which would be something like being more aware of the phenomena of being affected, which is to say, like you could be presented with a gargoyle, which motivates you out of fear into some sort of pious action, which is probably actually just giving over your power and your money to people in the church. Or you might be presented with an idea or an image of heavenly bliss or whatever, which is just another way of motivating you to give your money and your authority over to people in the church. I think it's, there's something interesting in that's not quite the middle ground, but it's in being aware of, I don't know, I just think there's something so fascinating about allowing imagistic, the importance of images to be experienced, but not to be moved by them as much. I have to find a better way to say this, but it's like the unknown or the uncertainty, because I think they're both offering, images have this sort of concrete, they offer this idea that there is a concrete finality, that there's something static in our lives, and that may not be the case. It may be that everything is constantly moving, and that life is far stranger than we have any capacity to navigate, and reassure ourselves with this image of this concretization of an image of the way that life works, whether it's positive or negative.
You were an MFA in painting, correct? So did you find more catharsis in the painting aspect, or in like the digital warping of your images?
I think I found the exploration, the digital exploration, to be more rewarding and sort of exciting because the feedback is so immediate.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of, I get a feeling from images, like a kinesthetic sort of impression. And so I know sort of immediately, I register what seems to feel right without having to know what it's about or why it is that I'm feeling that way. And so I could have that feeling quite quickly. And once I felt like I had the right image, then it was, a completely different experience to paint it. It's more sort of meditative and, but also, sometimes just sort of mindless. I think I've painted long enough that I could just do it and listen to an audiobook or podcast,
Do you think that digital art has more like prevalence in society today as opposed to like the traditional means of painting?
It seems so, yeah.
Okay, so I've got a question about, can you explain an NFT to me?
I know only the most basic. I mean, I can regurgitate whatever it is, like, it stands for non-fungible token.
It's someone like owning a GIF, right? Or a GIF.
Yeah. So it's the decentralized, like the blockchain technology is the idea that a whole bunch of computers form a network, and they're all aware of what's going on. So you can't manipulate what's going on in one with all of the other ones knowing about it. So it sort of makes everything public, which is why you could make something a non-fungible item or token. Is that non-fungible just means you couldn't replace it. You can't pretend to have it when you don't. So it's a bunch of computers talking to each other. And so wherever that image is, whoever is the verified owner of it, all of these people know about it, and you can't change anything anywhere on that network to convince them that that's not what's happening.
Do you think this is just a trend, or do you see like the viability in this as a digital artist? Is this just like a fad?
I think it'll be regulated more before too long. I think right now it's a way to make a lot of money really quickly, and probably also not probably, literally to like launder money and to avoid taxes and that sort of thing. But that happens in the art world as well. The art market is largely driven by people who have no interest in art. It's when economics comes into it, I think that's what's driving it. So there are certainly going to be people who are interested for its own sake, for a pure quote unquote reason relative to the art. But I think the future should be a mix of things, both good and sort of nauseating, but also interesting.
I thought it was kind of funny. If it was in my brain, it was just like someone owning like a digital painting. You have these like patrons of the arts who will like buy large scale paintings and like display them in their kitchen or above their dining room and show them to their other wealthy friends. How do you display a GIF? Just like call them over to your desktop and be like, hey, look at this tiny little icon. It moves. I own it.
Yeah, I think, there'll probably be some, physical, someone will come up with some sort of frame. They have those sorts of things, and your work could be presented digitally. But I think a lot of what this stuff may be pointing to is something that's like, a new, just sort of an emergent virtual space or spaces where that may become much more immersive, and it will become more sort of like Ready Player One, if you've seen that, like where you can literally own something, or you can decorate a home, or you can do these sorts of things. So I think it'll be, perhaps some of it will just be in new spaces. People will gather at someone's really fancy mansion with all of its digital art or something. I don't know. Does that prompt anything for you? Like, meditation and images? Does that make you think of anything? I don't mean to be interviewing you.
No, it's totally fine. There's something For me, meditative about, this is just personal for me specifically, it's like landscapes. As someone who like really enjoys nature and finds something serene like that to be calming, I can literally just stand in front, whether it's like a photo representation or like a painting, I can just stare at that sort of thing for hours. I go with my sisters to like museums, and I'll be the one who's like dawdling in the back. I'm like, just 5 more minutes to let me look at this tree or something.
Yeah.
So that's just a personal, I've always really found comfort in natural things.
What is it like when you're presented with a landscape? Like maybe, I think you went to Hawaii over the summer or something.
Mm-hmm, I did.
Do you have a similar experience just with landscape, like the world?
Very much so, very much so. I grew up in Hawaii, so I've always just been very aware of nature and like my connection to it. We gardened when I was younger, and we lived in like the jungle, kind of. There's just less city than urban rural Texas in general. More trees, more animals, more things to be aware of. So for me, going back recently, it was a different like change of pace, and everything's very much slowed down when you go back. They have island time, so everything is kind of just like no one's speeding. Everyone's kind of like late to things. Everybody's very just in the moment and enjoying life as it happens. And whether that's like me just enjoying the view from my balcony, my lanai, or just sitting in my backyard or something like that, it's very, very like comforting.
It's so easy to become habituated to things that are perpetually stressful. Like there's and I think images, it seems to me, in rapid succession, digitally presented are a means of sort of they're more about checking out. They're more about disappearing and leaving than connecting. That seems to be the thing. And whatever is hidden in these old images, they're about something. They're about connection. I think the occult and religion are really about our sense of ourselves and feeling at home, basically. Certain practices, like meditation is a difficult word to use, but it's like I try to sit outside in the morning before using a screen, and it's just that sort of thing. I think I'm not doing anything, but it's sort of, I'm receiving a message from, so to speak, my body is coexistent with all this other stuff which is happening. The sun is rising, and clouds are moving, and the birds and the squirrels are doing their thing. And that tells me something about what's literally happening from one perspective. That's the being that I'm participating with, that I'm coexistent with, that's happening all the time. And the digital space, I certainly don't mean to demonize it or anything, but it does something for the nervous system that feels like it's not quite the same as seeing trees or seeing the grass or whatever.
Very much so. Ivan, these glasses, they're not real. They're blue light resistant, and that's just about it. Like, I know that staring at my phone is no good for me, that I should really go outside and like touch a tree or touch some grass. But it's something that I've just become, I don't want to say addicted to, because I don't want to admit that to myself. But I feel drawn to the digital like world. And I don't know if that's me not being happy with what's outside my house, or if it's designed to enamor me.
I think it's both, and also we're just so social as well. Like, we're fundamentally social creatures, and I know that when I rely on videos, it's so that I feel connected more so. And I think that's a response too. It's like, if I want to see anyone, I have to leave leave the box that I'm living in, my house, get in a box, and then drive to some other box and meet other people. It's it's just it's a very atomized experience, and I think a lot of that, we have a very difficult. Nothing is super simple, but it's easy to, if you can manufacture a need, that is, if you can atomize people and make it so that in order to get anywhere or do anything or to sustain yourself, you need a car, then you just, you separate people out, and our life is just in little pieces, it seems like. But maybe I'm just more isolated than some. So.
Speaking of being social, you're talking at the painting symposium today, correct?
Yeah,
is that an in-person thing, or are you gonna?
It's gonna be in person. That's
very exciting. What are you gonna talk about?
I made some works, I guess a year and a half ago, and they sort of some of the works were part of a class that was about ecology and environmental issues.
Oh, very cool.